There we go. So hi everyone, and thank you for coming to our morning event today with B called Developing a Hybrid EAP in Sessional Syllabus. I'm going to introduce B. It feels a bit strange introducing someone that I work with, but I have written a little introductory script. So B is a professor of EAP here at the University of Leeds, and from 2019 to 2024 she led the in-sessional team focusing on embedding in-sessional provision across the university in different departments. She now co-leads the online MA in teaching English for academic purposes and teaches in-sessional across 3 schools: geography, sociology and social policy, and history, the latter of which she's going to talk to us about today. So B, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to you. Here we go.
Thanks, Jenna. Morning, everybody, or evening, depending on where you are. So what I'm going to do, when I was talking to Jenna about this yesterday at work, she was a bit concerned because a lot of the in-sessional SIG people were not here and not available, because June, I think, is one of those months where you think that you're going to be free and then all sorts of things happen that mean that you're not. So to try and make things easier for everybody, including myself, and because people seem to suddenly have meetings that they have to go to when we go into breakout rooms anyway, there are going to be no breakout rooms today. I've got some questions that I'm going to post in the chat and revisit them at the end. So they're questions for you to sort of think about as you're listening to me ramble on. If you've got any thoughts or comments around any of those sort of throughout sort of the things that I'm saying, or you want to revisit them at the end and ask questions, then that's fine. So I'll post those questions now before I totally forget. And remember, I don't use Zoom very often, so apologies for the ineptness of the kind of technology. The other thing, I've got a lot of caveats, which I kind of always seem to start with, that I'm a little bit concerned about, is I did say that I'm going to share the kind of materials and the sort of syllabus that I created, which I intend to do. I have been into the permissions of the Padlet that I created and the things, but because it's a Lead system, there always seems to be a sort of an extra layer and level of permission that I've failed to find. So apologies if you can't access it. I will show it on screen, but and then I will try and share later if I fail miserably. So where am I? Share that screen. Can everybody see that? Yeah, great. Okay. So that's the questions that you've already got. What I am talking about is a very, very, I suppose, at Leeds, because we work within schools, we get really quite specific in the work that we do. We're working with a particular discipline, and a lot of the conversations we have with each other are around how the further into a discipline you get, the less you feel comfortable with what you're doing if you're working with students across more than one master's programme, because it doesn't feel quite specific. But we are also aware that that's quite a privileged position, and a lot of in-sessional is EGAP or much broader in terms of looking at broad disciplines. So I think one of the questions for all of us really is to kind of think about how specific should we be going when we're talking about in-sessional? How deep should we go, and what makes it feasible to do that or not, and what value is there for students in that sort of specificity anyway? So I kind of thought it would be interesting to talk about what I did with history, because for me at least, it was a new way of thinking about in-sessional and working. I'm not convinced that it worked, but we'll come to that, because it was intended and planned to be hybrid, both in terms of starting as an online programme and moving to on campus, but also starting with students before they started their master's programme and then following them as they went into their master's programme. There were a lot of issues around that, so I'll kind of come to that in a minute. So the context slide that we all have to start with, because everybody's context is different. It was working with the School of History. It was a new collaboration, so we'd never worked with them before. History, in terms of international students, which are the students that you know, where we get schools coming and talking to us, is when they think that they need help with their international student kind of cohort. And history has traditionally not really had many international students anyway, so they've never really thought about working with us. We have had a few history students working on our coming and joining our pre-sessional, but again, not many of them. So they were starting to notice a change and a diversification of their cohort at master's level, so they wanted to work with us. But it is a small school, and as with most parts of any university at the moment, but I think history was already sort of noticing financial constraints. And then for me, there were time constraints in that they didn't really start talking to us about it until round about this time last year. And they weren't willing to pay for anything. They wanted to see what was happening. And because we're part of the same faculty, we tend to sort of do this kind of work anyway, it's sort of pro bono, to kind of get a foot in the door and then sort of work and develop that collaboration, particularly within our own faculty. And what they said was that they didn't really want anything. I tried to persuade them that it was much better to work with students all the way through an academic year, but they just wanted to sort of see what happened and just have 4 weeks of something. It was in response to this sort of increase in international students, but they thought it was a large number of students. But when we talk about a large number of students with the sort of students that we've worked with in, for example, the business school in media and communications, we're talking about a cohort of 300 students at taught postgraduate level. They were talking about a cohort of 30 to 40. So I kind of had to keep a very straight face when they were telling me they had these really high numbers. But they were also linguistically diverse, a range of different linguistic backgrounds. Although it was a small number of students, for that small number of students, they were talking about 4 different PGT programs. And you kind of think, okay, it's history, it's all the same. But when that included medieval history, no, it's not. Medieval history is a whole different beast in and of itself. And one of the programs was new in this academic year, international history. So there was nothing available for me to look at there at all. And there was no common core module across the 4 programs. And that the way that we work in other schools usually is to kind of connect to, it's almost always the research methods module that is common across all PGT programs in some way, shape or form, but history didn't have any of that. So there was not really anything much that I could find to tie my work into. What they wanted was me to only work with international students, and I think in the past we've agreed for that, but I suppose I felt that I had enough cultural capital and power, and because we were doing it for free, to put my foot down a little bit and say, if we're talking about this number of students, and the issues that they were coming to us with were around participation in seminars. So history pedagogy is very, very sort of traditional university Socratic discussion in a seminar that enables students to kind of build a level of argumentation that they would then put into their writing. And I insisted that if that was the issue, it wasn't an issue only for international students. And one of the things that I needed to do was work around how you make a coherent and cohesive and confident group kind of work together. So I did offer it to all students in the end. They wanted something for staff on how to manage international students and language difficulties. So they wanted me to work with them as well. They were pretty vague. And I think what they wanted was sort of quick fix. What do I do when I've got this problem with students who don't speak in my classroom? And I said that I wasn't going to do that. I couldn't address that. There were no quick fixes. We did eventually have a bit of a discussion about whether their pedagogy should change. And I didn't think it should. There's a reason that history pedagogy is the way it is. I wasn't there to tell them to change the way that they taught entirely. But I did say that it was a long-term project of thinking about things, and that I would do really, I wanted to spend more than 2 hours, but I knew I wasn't going to get them to sit with me for more than 2 hours, workshop on surfacing knowledge, genre and discourse awareness. And if any of you were at the Barleap conference and went to Steve Kirk's second talk, basically I borrowed the work that he's done in Durham to do that work with the historians. I didn't get to do that until much later in the day than I wanted to. So before the programme began, I had one meeting with the 4 programme leads. It was online. I wanted to meet them on campus to kind of get to know them, but they were busy doing other things with their leads has taught postgraduate lead in each school. So I met her, the director of student education, and then the library has learning advisors who are connected to different schools. And I met the learning advisor to talk about what they did so that I was not kind of crossing over work and we were working together. They did give me access to our virtual learning environment is called Minerva. So I got access to the previous year's Minerva modules. So I could see what they were planning to do, what they'd done the previous year, and I was given kind of instructor status. So it meant I could see the assignments that students had submitted. So I could see what they'd asked to do and what they'd produced. They did also give me access to some of the students, but it was June. A lot of them had kind of disappeared or were sort of kind of heads in their dissertation work, and I didn't get a response from many. So I did speak to one student, and then having looked at the student assignments, I kind of picked out ones that had got kind of sort of higher grades, positive feedback that I thought might be willing to share, and they agreed to let me use their assignments and the feedback, and I got permission from the tutors to use the tutors' feedback in what I was working with as well. So that's all that I had to work with, and I didn't really know what the students needed. I didn't know what they wanted, and I was pretty sure that they also wouldn't know what they needed or wanted when I was working with them before online, not having met them, and before they arrived to do their master's programme. Also, because it was June that we decided to do this, the students didn't know that it was available to them. So they hadn't signed up for it. They hadn't kind of thought, oh, this is a great thing that I'm going to get to do. And I had a lot of concerns about what that meant, because I was going to be kind of delivering online in some way, some stuff around history that students didn't know that they needed. And I didn't really know where to start. And having access to the Minerva modules actually kind of overwhelmed me, because there were a lot, and there were 4 different programs and a lot of different kind of content that they were dealing with. And then I was talking to people at work, and a colleague, Letitia Mombeck, kind of mentioned this book, and this saved my life. So if ever you're working with history students, I would recommend it. I devoured it over a day, sort of felt it was amazing luxury just sitting and reading a book, but feeling it was really purposeful. And it's brilliant. So Carolyn Coffin, Historical Discourse, and she did a study of historical discourse. It was in schools, mainly in Australia, but also in the UK. But it was in sort of followed the development of an understanding of what history is and how the discourse is built from primary school up to the end of secondary school. So it's a lower level in terms of kind of study level than the students I was working with. But in terms of the language used and the kind of different ways of thinking about history, it breaks it down beautifully, and building up to the idea that judgment is the kind of final thing that you should be doing in history. And so it helped me kind of break things down for students, and that question that you always get with students about how can I be critical, it was clear that it's through judgment for historians, and kind of thinking about where that criticality is. So that's kind of what I started with.